What was Final Fantasy Mystic Quest? I want you to imagine a Final Fantasy game that was deliberately, consciously made easier. So easy, in fact, that the creators dubbed it the simplified role-playing game designed for entry-level players. Final Fantasy for Idiots. In 1992, Squaresoft did exactly that with Final Fantasy Mystic Quest. It was a spin-off title built from the ground up for the Western market, which wasn't really familiar with JRPGs or RPG mechanics, and it released on the Super Nintendo as a beginner-friendly offshoot of the famous Final Fantasy series. It was a game so tailored to newcomers that in Japan it was literally called Final Fantasy USA, 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 Mystic Quest. And Mystic Quest has earned a reputation as the black sheep of the franchise, and it's often dismissed as baby's first RPG or baby's first JRPG, yet it remains a pretty fascinating and cool case study in gaming history. So what was this game? Why was it made? Why was it so unique? And why do some people argue it's one of Final Fantasy's most important, if not kind of bizarre pillars? So let's dive in. Final Fantasy Mystic Quest was created with a very clear mission. It was to just broaden the appeal of JRPGs outside of Japan, mainly the West, mainly America. That's it. It wasn't to introduce, this great gaming experience per se. It wasn't to make the best story or, show off the Super Nintendo. They just wanted to make Final Fantasy bigger and introduce JRPGs. So at the time, console RPGs were kind of niche in North America, and Square noticed that the first few Final Fantasies really weren't doing all that great here in North America, and particularly the US. So Squaresoft executives kind of theorized that Americans were turned off by the perceived difficulty and complexity of JRPGs, and rather than immediately localize a challenging, Final Fantasy V challenging, I don't think it's challenging, but at the time, this was kind of a new-ish genre here. So they thought, Final Fantasy V, too challenging for the United States. So they greenlit Mystic Quest as sort of a training wheels JRPG for the Western market. So in the words of one retrospective, Square was basically proclaiming to Americans, you guys can't really handle our real product. So we're going to give you a version that's more up to your speed, or down to your speed, I guess. And to achieve this, Square's Japanese dev team worked very closely with its American branch to strip down the classic Final Fantasy formula. They consciously toned down the difficulty, the gameplay systems were simplified, and they even aimed the content at a younger generation, aka kids. They wanted to make a game that really, really appealed to children, which is actually kind of interesting. Mystic Quest was released in America first. Usually it's the other way around. It goes Japan and then West. This time it was America first, and later it came to Japan and eventually Europe. And surprisingly, this was the first Final Fantasy that was released in Europe, which I didn't know until I was kind of looking into all this stuff. Square even priced Mystic Quest at $39.99 US, which was cheaper than most, Super Nintendo games at the time. And they thought by doing this, they could kind of grab more curious, casual RPG fans to just give this Final Fantasy Mystic Quest thing a shot. And the stage was set for what Square hoped would be the beginning gateway into RPGs in the West. So what made Mystic Quest so different? Why was this game very different from all the other Final Fantasy experiences? To seasoned Final Fantasy fans, Mystic Quest felt almost unrecognizable by design. The game did away or heavily changed a lot of this series' staples in favor of simplicity and approachability. So here's some of the standout differences and the features that made Mystic Quest very, very unique. No random encounters. So perhaps the most jarring change of that time, you have to remember of this time, Mystic Quest eliminated random enemy battles entirely. Instead, monsters are just visible. They're walking around, stationary sprites in dungeons and the fields and woods, and you fight them only when you walk into them. You can even leave a battle, or you can even leave a dungeon to heal, and when you return, the monsters haven't respawned. They're still gone. On the world map, there is an optional battlefield node, which lets you engage in up to 10 preset battles for extra rewards, but these can be skipped if you're not in the mood to really grind. It was a grinding mechanic. And this was unheard of in the mainline Final Fantasy games. This was completely different, and at the time, this was just something Final Fantasy didn't do. And the no random encounter design is actually something a lot of RPGs would later do, including Squaresoft and Square Enix. It's kind of funny, things are a little more cyclical than they seem sometimes, because this no random encounter thing kind of caught on. Maybe Mystic Quest was onto something here. We're going to get into that, okay? Now, another thing that made Mystic Quest very distinct from other Final Fantasies was its action-adventure elements. So, to appeal to players that were more used to action-oriented games, Mystic Quest let you interact with the actual world in ways Final Fantasies just didn't. It's pretty simple. You can jump. There is an actual jump button. You could use weapons and tools in the field to solve puzzles. Like, you could chop down trees. Bomb walls to open up a secret passage. You could push blocks. You could use the grappling hook, the Dragon Claw, to swing across gaps. Obviously, this was all very heavily inspired by Zelda, which of course was very popular in the West. Zelda, one of the biggest franchises in the world. We love Zelda, and to be honest, I wouldn't be mad if they introduced more of this kind of gameplay system or mechanic in future games. I think it's pretty cool to mix and match these kind of different genres. Whether you love it or hate it, this is what Mystic Quest did. Now, another thing that set it apart was the streamlined combat. And I'll leave it up to you guys in the comments whether you want to put a pro or a con label on any of these, but this is just what made it unique. Streamlined combat and stats. So battles in Mystic Quests are they're turn-based, like classic Final Fantasies. But they are heavily, some would say overly simplified. You only ever have 2 party members, max, the hero, which is Benjamin, and 1 guest ally at a time. So you can toggle between the ally to autopilot if you want the game to basically play itself for any period of time. And equipment management is super minimal. You automatically replace your old crappy gear with new upgraded gear when you find it. There's no shops. There's no like Armor Shop. Everybody loves to go into New Town and see what's for sale. That's not in this game. And also the item system is it's the simplest thing ever, basically. There's no Phoenix Down or Antidote or what's another Echo Screen. You know what I mean? You have 1 potion that just heals basically everything. This is to reduce the clutter and reduce confusion, because apparently we're so stupid we can't, think there can be different items to heal different status ailments. But hey, this is 92, I think. Is this 92? Was it released in 92? So yeah, you just have 1 item to heal everything. And the interface actually gave you the option to show your HP just on a visual HP bar rather than numbers, 500 HP. We can't figure that out. No, we need a bar, right? We need the bar to visualize how much HP we have, because we can't figure out what 200 out of 500 would possibly mean. And if your party dies, you're not kicked to a game over screen. You can retry the battle on the spot with no penalty. Although there is a temporary power drop for the hero, but other than that, you'll be right up to speed in no time. Like I said, all this seems very cyclical because all these kind of dumbed down mechanics. Is it just me, or are we seeing a lot of that come back and has been back for a little while now? Let me know in the comments if any of these sound familiar from modern games. And moving on, Mystic Quest, as expected, had a very scaled down scope and difficulty. And I touched on this a little bit. I'll go into a little bit more here, but I'm not going to linger too long. So Mystic Quest's story and world are completely straightforward and completely linear. The plot is a basic 4 elemental crystals that you need to gather to save the world. No twists, no narrative complexity, no huge character arcs or plot twists, whatever doesn't really exist in Mystic Quest. And the game world is pretty small itself. It's just one continent and it's divided into different sections and regions. And you travel along a preset path on the map. And it feels like Mario 3, where you just kind of go wherever. But even Mario 3 has a little more freedom to where you can go next. And the difficulty, obviously, like I said, is very, very low. Enemies die in 1 or 2 or maybe 3 hits. Even bosses are pretty easy and forgiving. And the whole game is a lot shorter than a typical Final Fantasy game. You could beat it in a day if you really tried, and you could definitely beat it in a weekend if you played casually. All this is in line with the game's intent. This is not by accident. This is by intent, the beginner intent. Mystic Quest was deliberately balanced to ensure players rarely got stuck or got lost. And obviously this is at the cost of depth and challenge. Now I want to talk about what I love most about Mystic Quest and what a lot of people love most about Mystic Quest, and that's the graphics, the visuals, and the audio. And even though it was built on the Super Nintendo, Mystic Quest's graphics were actually a step down from a lot of its contemporaries like Final Fantasy IV. In fact, when I remember playing Mystic Quest, I played it when I was like 5 or 6 years old. And when I was a teenager and I would, randomly think about Mystic Quest, I always actually thought it was a regular Nintendo, an NES game and not a Super Nintendo game, because the graphics were so simple. And it's not a bad thing. Trust me, it's not a bad thing. I love simple graphics. You guys know, big Suikoden fan. I love sprites. I just personally, I always thought it was a Nintendo game. I forgot it was for the Super Nintendo. That's kind of the indicative of how the graphics looked, but I love it anyways. So yeah, a lot of the sprites and tiles were repurposed from the Game Boy Saga Final Fantasy Legends games. And it was kind of just touched up to add a little more color, a little more pizzazz, in case you missed that. And the game looked a little more cartoony, a little simpler than the Final Fantasy games. But one of the cool things was in battle, monsters actually kind of degraded and they showed visible damage as you hurt them, which was really cool, especially for the time. But even now, I love stuff like that, where the sprites would look battered and beat up, or they would lose parts or limbs or equipment as they took damage, which is a really cool touch, a really neat touch that even mainline Final Fantasy games didn't adopt for do they even do that now? Let me know in the comments. I can't, off the top of my head, I can't remember or think of a specific instance where Final Fantasy actually does do this now. But let me know in the comments, and we're going to move on to the audio front, which is my personal favorite part of the game, because the soundtrack to this game is killer. It'll be playing in the background the whole time, especially the boss music and the battle music. It could be nostalgia, but from what I've read, a lot of people love the soundtrack too. So maybe it's not just me, but the soundtrack, which was not written by Nobuo Uematsu, which was a big departure for the Final Fantasy series at the time, because Uematsu and Final Fantasy were just, at this time, they were woven together. It was actually made by Ryuji Sasai, and it was a little more rocky, not the movie Rocky, but a little more rock themed than a lot of Final Fantasy games, which were obviously inspired by classical medieval European music. Bangers all across the board though. I love it. So all of these differences made Mystic Quest extremely accessible to a newcomer like myself when I was a young kid. And I think you could argue it succeeded in teaching RPG basics to a lot of young children like myself. the idea of turn-based combat, of going into this completely different battle arena to fight instead of just fighting wherever you saw enemies, the idea of elemental weaknesses and exploring dungeons without kind of overwhelming the player. It definitely worked for me, but the flip side to that was, to any experienced RPG fan at the time, Mystic Quest felt way too simplistic, way too dumbed down, almost to a condescending a degree. Now, on release, Mystic Quest received a mixed reaction, to put it nicely. A lot of reviewers thought it was just okay. It was like a 5-6 out of 10 type of game. Game rankings, their aggregate score is actually a 67. A lot of people just didn't like it because it was so simple. And fans of the Final Fantasy series who had experienced the very epic and still S-tier Final Fantasy game, Final Fantasy IV, were largely disappointed. So they expected another grand adventure and instead got this kind of kiddie pool RPG. But for 5-6-year-old me, I thought it was great. You know, a lot of people just said, Mystic Quest, Identity Crisis, what are they thinking? And people just didn't really care for Mystic Quest, it seems. Now, from a sales standpoint, Mystic Quest was, for the time, it was kind of successful. It wasn't a breakout success, but it wasn't a flop either. It was somewhere in between. It was nowhere near the Final Fantasy numbers that, Squaresoft had been used to. And it sold about 800,000 copies, about half in America, half in Japan, which for a game that was exclusively meant to court American audiences, I'm actually surprised that it sold that much in Japan. It's about a 50-50 split. But crucially, Mystic Quest failed to kind of ignite this RPG boom that Square had hoped for in North America. It certainly did appeal to a lot of younger gamers. Mwah. And it's not because I found RPGs too difficult. It's because I just didn't know what an RPG was. So for me, I was the target audience for this. I didn't know, HP bars and elemental weaknesses and fighting turn-based. All this was brand new to me. It wasn't that I liked it because it was dumbed down. I liked it because it was something new and fresh, and a fresh experience for me personally. That's why I liked it. So yeah, that said, everything in Mystic Quest wasn't just universally panned. Like I said, a lot of people, when I'm reading about Mystic Quest and I was reading up for this, they really like the soundtrack. So I'm glad I'm not the only one and it's not just completely nostalgia based. Although for me personally, that is a big factor. I'm a big nostalgia Andy, basically. You guys know that. The graphics were very simple but colorful, and you can't go wrong with sprites. You have to really be an idiot to mess up sprite-based graphics. And the monster animations, like the getting beat up over time, is actually really, really, really cool. And it's something that, again, I don't remember if Final Fantasy does that now. And I feel like they should. I know other games do it. Where if you take enough damage, the enemy starts limping or something, But they should really do that if they're not already. I don't know why I can't think if they're doing it or not, but whatever. So why does Mystic Quest still matter in the grand scheme of things? So given its middling success and often scathing critiques, why would we call Mystic Quest one of the most important pillars of the franchise? In truth, Mystic Quest occupies a very unique spot in Final Fantasy history, and its legacy is more significant than it first appears. Number one, it was a bold experiment in accessibility. Mystic Quest was one of the first major instances of a major developer radically altering their core game formula to kind of court this new audience. And it proved that Square was willing to experiment, even to the point of potentially alienating their hardcore fans in order to grow the genre, which was very risky, very bold, kind of a little courageous, and you could say stupid at the same time. It's a fine line between courage and stupidity. You know what I mean? This sort of beginner's RPG concept was risky and arguably misguided, but it did show Square's commitment to cracking the Western market. So in retrospect, I should say, Mystic Quest embodies the Final Fantasy spirit of trying new things, because that is the through line through every Final Fantasy game. They are always at least attempting something new. And in this sense, Mystic Quest falls right in line with that philosophy. And Square did learn from Mystic Quest. The lukewarm reception taught them that Western players didn't necessarily need or want a dumbed down version of game. You know, they just wanted the right games. They didn't want this Japanese block where the game is full fleshed out, and then a Western block where the game is stripped down and all the soul is kind of sucked out of it. So we get this kind of generic experience. In the years after Mystic Quest, instead of making more kind of easy mode spin-offs, Square just localized deeper RPG experiences like Final Fantasy VI, which was 3 in the US, but I will never call it that, and Chrono Trigger. And all this just proves that rich storytelling and the way you present the story will just resonate with the audience no matter where they are in the world. And I can forgive them a little bit, because in 92, video games were still relatively new and still kind of reaching critical mass. By the time Final Fantasy VII hit in 97, it turned out, hey, tens of millions of people love the full-fledged JRPG experience. No Mystic Quest is required. So in a way, Mystic Quest's failure sort of redirected Squaresoft's approach. They focused on making the main games more accessible through, not through gameplay necessarily, but through better tutorials and better localization, even though the localization still wasn't all that great, but they were trying a lot harder and better marketing rather than splitting the franchise into a watered down version. So over 3 decades later, Mystic Quest has attained this sort of cult-like status. And gamers who remember it fondly, like myself, it's not for it being the best Final Fantasy by any stretch of the imagination, but for its lighthearted simplicity, the game's quirks like the goofy item names and the very, very cheesy but a little bit endearing dialogue. It's all part of the Final Fantasy mythos now. And interestingly, some features Mystic Quest toyed with did reappear in later very acclaimed titles, including a title that is considered the greatest game of all time, or one of the greatest games of all time, Chrono Trigger. No random encounters showed up in a lot of Final Fantasies since then, a lot of RPGs since then, and field puzzles and contextual tools became pretty commonplace in action RPGs. Mystic Quest didn't invent these things necessarily, but they definitely put them in their game. And for a game that was panned as much as Mystic Quest was, it's kind of interesting. A lot of these mechanics, a lot of these systems were way ahead of its time. And it's actually all kind of coming back into vogue now. It's all getting very popular again. This sort of story mode that even I've used. What was the last game I used a story mode on, where I just wanted to just turn off my mind and play a little bit? Oh yes, it was Expedition 33. So before you freak out, I don't care if you play story mode, it's whatever. But I was playing Expedition 33 and I was loving it. I was just playing it on the normal mode and I dropped it and I started playing something else. And everybody was talking about, oh my God, the ending was so good. It was so, and I love the ending. And I was like, all right, I got to finish this game. And I was, like balls deep in something else. And I was like, what? I need to go back. I need to finish Expedition 33, but I just wanted to mainline it. So I did put it on the story mode and, I finished it that way. And I love Expedition 33. So yeah, I'm not mad about the story mode difficulty in RPGs. I know some people care really, really a lot about it. I'm not one of those people. So in this sense, Mystic Quest was ahead of its time in a lot of different areas. It's just that it maybe overshot the mark by a little bit because they made it only for beginners and not this full-fledged experience where you could opt into the story mode, but the whole game was the story mode. You know what I mean? And lastly, we're going to start wrapping up here. Mystic Quest stands as this perfect time capsule of early 90s gaming culture, which I miss and I love and I miss. And it came from an era when publishers were truly fearful that certain genres were maybe too hardcore for a broad audience. But nowadays, it almost feels like the opposite, where the more, because games have gotten so dumbed down, the more hardcore a game is, the more it's lapped up by the gaming audience. Elden Ring, for example. And it's a really cool kind of dichotomy of the flip in philosophy in game design. And Mystic Quest just stands as this perfect relic of the 16-bit age. In the end, Mystic Quest wasn't anyone's best RPG, but it certainly has earned its place in gaming history, in my opinion. It's the Final Fantasy that broke all the rules at the time in order to teach newbies like myself the ropes. A game that is simultaneously charming and a little baffling and a little simple, but also a little ahead of its time. And whether you see it as a misstep or kind of this misunderstood gem, Mystic Quest sparked a lot of conversation about what exactly an RPG stood for and how you should make it and who you should make it for. And for that reason alone, in my eyes, it's an essential chapter in JRPG history and Final Fantasy lore and mythos. And sometimes the most important pillars aren't the big towering successes or the acclaimed or the ones that sell tens of millions of copies, but it's the odd experimental ones that show us a different way to play. And Mystic Quest is exactly that. An odd, earnest experience that dared to ask, what if we made an RPG for the kids who've never played one before, like myself? And I tell you what, I make this channel. I think it worked, at least for me. I want to know in the comments, did it work for you? Because I fell in love with Final Fantasy after this. Again, I was a kid. I wasn't like a teenager or a grown adult, but I definitely went down the rabbit hole of JRPGs ever since Mystic Quest. And actually don't click off. I have a very funny, okay, maybe it's not funny. It's actually kind of a scary story in a sense, but it does have to do with Mystic Quest. So I had Mystic Quest, like I said, when I was 5 or 6 years old. And one day before school, I wanted to play it. So I was with my little brother and my mom. This was the early 90s, was taking my oldest brother to, I think he was in high school at that time. My oldest brother has passed away now, rest in peace. But I think he was in high school at that time. And I don't know where, I have 3 brothers. I don't know where my second oldest was. Regardless, I'm getting off topic. We were playing Mystic Quest, me and my little brother. He was just watching me and I was playing. And I went into the kitchen and I popped in a couple Pop-Tarts into the toaster. And I went back to play Mystic Quest. And I'm playing and I'm playing and I'm having I'm having fun. I'm 6 years old and something started to feel a little off in the house. I didn't know what it was. You're 6. Your perception of the world around you is basically nil. And I go and I think I smell something. I don't know. Something just feels a little off. I put the controller down. I walk out into the living room, which is connected to the kitchen. And the lighting is a little weird. It's a little foggy. Something's a little off. And so I go and I start to hear something. I walk into the kitchen and it's like my entire wall was on fire. My toaster was underneath the kitchen cabinets and it was on fire, and the wall, the kitchen cabinets were on fire, and I'm frozen. I know what I'm supposed to do. 911, 911, 911. That's the emergency number here in the US. 911. It's like when you're in that, like a bad dream and you can't move. It's like you're in molasses. I think from what I can remember, I think I was able to press the number 9, and like my body's frozen. I'm literally petrified. I'm petrified. And like I'm just looking and I'm like, and I press the 9 and I can't move after that. I am completely horrified. I don't know what to do. Or I do know what to do, but my body can't I can't process this. And then I hear this busting boom, 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 boom at the door. It is this kid who I think was in junior high or maybe high school or something, and he busts down my door and he grabs a blanket and he's like whacking the fire with with the blanket, and he smothers it. He ends up smothering it and he puts it out. And before I can even say anything, this motherfucker caught the bus. He caught the bus. He came, he walked to school. He probably saw us in there, these little kids. He was a hero, a true hero. He not busted in the door. He put out the fire, and then he still caught the bus to school. And God bless that kid. He probably legit may have saved our lives. He definitely saved our house. He maybe probably did save me and my little brother, maybe not from the fire, but from the smoke inhalation. And wherever you are, true hero, never got your name. I don't even remember what you looked like. All I remember is you putting out that fire. And I don't even remember if I said thank you. I think maybe I said it under my breath. And he was gone and he went off to school. And I think that's probably a cool story that he tells about how he saved these little two kids who were too busy playing Final Fantasy Mystic Quest, even though he don't know that. My mom came home and she was just glad we were okay. And yeah, she never left us alone after that. And again, this was the early 90s. You know, this is how it was sometimes, especially with a single mom, and she had 4 kids. So she had a lot of responsibilities going around. And she was just glad we were okay. I never left the toaster unattended ever again. And that is my Mystic Quest story. True story, all very real. And yeah, let me know if you have any cool, interesting kitchen fire stories when it comes to Final Fantasy Mystic Quest. Have an amazing day. God bless you. God bless that kid who saved me and my little brother. And you guys have an amazing day.